Well, I've come to the conclusion that doing videos on politics and history and news and world events, philosophy and all that other stuff, it's a lot of work because you have to do research. And I've noticed these things called reaction videos all over the YouTube. And it looks a lot easier to me, so I've decided that I'm going to try a reaction video of my own today. Let's see how we do. Let's see if I can get millions of followers for doing my reaction video.
We have here in the chamber today Ukrainian Canadian world veteran from the Second World War who fought Ukrainian independence against the Russians and continues to support the troops today, and at his age of 98.
That's him. That's him.
His name is Yaroslav Hunka. And I was going to say he's in the gallery, but I think you beat me to that. But I'm very proud to say that he is from North Bay and from my riding of Nipissing Temiskaming. He's a Ukrainian hero, a Canadian hero, and we thank him for all his service. Thank you.
Well, wasn't that special? So, the Canadian Parliament has humiliated themselves by honoring a man of Ukrainian descent who, at the very least, volunteered to work on behalf of German National Socialists. And he belonged to a unit that definitely committed war crimes. There's a deep lesson to be derived from this, but you're going to need some background. First things first, anti-Semitism wasn't invented by the Germans. The major pogroms of Europe occurred in Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. Prior to World War II, Germany was considered one of the major safe havens for Jews fleeing from Eastern Europe. The word pogrom itself is actually a Yiddish alteration of the Russian word pogromu, which means roughly devastation and destruction. Fritz Hitler, a famous National Socialist propagandist, the one who made the very well-known propaganda film The Eternal Jew, said that the Germans had to be taught to hate Jews. They were not born to hate them as the Eastern Europeans do. By the time World War II rolled around, Ukraine had been part of Russia for over 140 years, with but a one-year break at the end of the First World War. Despite the passage of time, many Ukrainians still hoped for freedom from Russia. We have three gentlemen who were socialists during the World War II era: Joseph, Benito, and Adolf. Didn't do that in order, but you get the idea. They all have the end or near end goal of total socialism. Joseph thinks we get to socialism via class struggle. Benito thinks we get to socialism via national struggle, and Adolf via race struggle. They are all revolutionaries. Now, Adolf's revolution failed, so he had to get to power via the electorate. Now, there were many reasons why people became National Socialists, Marxist socialists, or even fascists. Some fully understood what was being proposed. and embraced it wholeheartedly. Some had a vague sense of what socialism was and didn't care to get into the mechanics of it in terms of understanding how it worked. They were just willing to go along as long as they thought it would work. Some went along because they didn't want a bayonet shoved up their poop hole. In other words, not all participants were enthusiastic, and not all participants fully participated. As I mentioned, the Ukrainians had been under Russia's thumb for 140 years. They revolted numerous times, and each time they got smashed down brutally. In 1932 to 1933, we had what was known as the Holodomor, which ended up killing around 6 million Ukrainians. 8 years later, the German leader Adolf and his sharp-dressed polka boys would show up to fight the Russians. So, what do you suppose the average Ukrainian did? On one side is the Soviet Russians, who 8 years earlier killed off 6% of your neighbors by starving them and burying them alive. 6 million. 6 million of your countrymen dead. So, do you side with the Soviets who did this, or do you side with the invaders who are promising you autonomy and have already set up a government run by Ukrainians? Russian Ukrainians and die-hard Marxist Ukrainians sided with the Russians. Ardent nationalists and anti-communists sided with the Germans. The Ukrainian volunteers were in formations that committed atrocities and assisted with solving the Jewish problem, if you know what I mean. As I noted, anti-Semitism and pogroms were already a feature in East Europe. Like their German counterparts, some enthusiastically embraced war crimes, some participated under duress, while others found ways not to directly participate. Once Ukraine was back in Soviet Russian hands, they experienced, once again, hardcore repression. Some estimates are as high as 7 million Ukrainians were murdered by Russia between 1945 and 1950. For Ukrainians of the Ukraine, there will always be an enmity with Russia. Prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, the longest stretch of free time from the Russians was the period of World War II, when the Germans occupied Ukraine. The most successful anti-Russian fighters in Ukraine's history were the volunteers that fought side by side with the National Socialist Germans. These men wore swastikas, SS lightning bolts, Death Head's insignia, and many other German National Socialist symbology on their Ukrainian uniforms. These symbols represented resistance to Russia, to the Ukrainians. Firstly, it did not mean the same to them as it does to us in the West. The Azov Brigade has become infamous for its National Socialist symbology. This group has distinguished itself against the Russians. Its ideology is murky, apparently very anti-immigrant, but not apparently anti-Jewish, or at least not in an overt way. They don't seem to mind having a Jewish president. Needless to say, there is a lot more subtlety to National Socialism and Ukrainian history than it is possible in any way to get from our legacy media. Now, I don't mean for a second to provide cover for Trudeau and the Canadian Parliament. This is a natural consequence when all nuance is surrendered to Russia bad, anything that's for Russia bad, anything that is against Russia is good. What other conclusion could simpletons like this come to when you use that kind of rule set to make your decisions? Consider also, these are the same assholes fist pumping for a man who may have been a war criminal or not, but definitely fought alongside war criminals. These people think they are so smart that they not only grasp all that's needed to be known about Ukraine and the surrounding area, that they can confidently predict the consequences of all the actions that are being taken in the region by the West. This incident in Parliament shows ignorance and arrogance on a truly awe-inspiring scale. If these people can't get something this simple right in the light of the binary good-bad rules that they've created, how on earth are they going to get real-world Ukrainian policy right when things are far, far more complicated? So comment below. What do you think? Do you think American Congress and Canadian Parliament members are smart enough to actually shape policy safely halfway across the world when they can barely understand what's going on in their own backyard? Comment below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, look at my other titles. Please consider subscribing. If you think someone might find this interesting, please share it with them. And that might be the last reaction video I do. I don't know. Just depends how it goes. Well, I appreciate you spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.